Hello, everybody, and happy May the 4th. For those of you who don't know me, I am Jamie Boyd. I'm the Chief Digital Officer, and I'm delighted to welcome you today to the May update on digital government across the BC government. Hopefully, you are all feeling very empowered as digital Jedis. And as I was saying, just as we were getting on the call, if there was any doubt remaining about the nerdiness of our crew, I think we have now officially gotten rid of that. A couple of updates before we turn it over to a wonderful guest that we have today. So we'll start with our usual updates, and then I'm thrilled to be joined today by Charmaine, who's going to be talking to us a little bit about modernizing the justice and public safety sector. A couple of notes before we get into that. As usual, we're making lots of incremental progress around the digital framework, and we're starting to give some thought to the next iteration of that digital framework. So, as many of you have seen in the past, we've identified those 4 priority pillars around digital government. As a reminder, those pillars are around providing great services to the people of BC, ensuring that we have really sound stewardship of data and information, taking steps to become more digital inside the organization, and then also being connected outside with and for the communities that we serve. And so we're continuing to prioritize those 4 pillars, and we are starting to look at actions that we can take within those 4 pillars, given that we've accomplished a lot of the things that we initially set out to do when we published that first iteration of the digital framework back in July 2019. Last month, we spoke about some of the initiatives that we've developed in the digital space around COVID response. So we are looking also to take advantage of some of the progress that's been made within the context of COVID and the digital response to the pandemic. One of the things that I wanted to flag is that we are starting to see good progress on some of the sort of next generation commitments that we've made. Some of the projects that I've been particularly excited to see move forward in the last little while are around hosting. For example, we've got in the next couple of months a proposal coming out of the Ministry of Citizen Services proceeding to the Digital Investment Board around a cloud brokerage service. We're also seeing lots of progress on APIs, on data flows. And of course, for those of you who are looking at the mandate letters, you will have seen a strong commitment around open data. So good progress happening there. We're also seeing really interesting initiatives to uplift some of the digital infrastructure that's available across government. So one that's really jumped out to me in the last little while are investments coming out of the health sector around modernizing messaging and identity solutions. So lots of really neat projects happening across government. As always, we are continuing to encourage good adoption of the digital principles. Please feel free to use this slide or reach out if you'd like to use it. We are really looking to continue to raise awareness of the direction of travel on this. And one thing that I wanted to flag to this group is that just yesterday, the government CIO launched the new capital intake process for next year. So for those who are perhaps a little less familiar with this, we are moving to an annual intake cycle for projects that are potentially going to be funded through the government's IMIT Minor Capital Fund. So that's a fund that's currently valued at $110 million. And we are inviting our friends and partners across government to start identifying concept cases that could potentially be funded through that. On the slide, you see some of the objectives that we've established for the capital intake process. So making sure that we have a good sense of the projects that are under development, assessing whether or not we have sufficient capital to meet the different priorities across government, prioritizing those projects, and really trying to leverage the initiatives to build coherence across government and create predictability so that teams like yourselves can do your best work. You'll see that we also have some specific goals for the next year that are really focused around trying to make sure that we're truly measuring what we want to be measuring, that we're growing beyond an indication of project maturity based on things like spend rate, and instead of focusing on the sorts of outcomes that we're achieving for British Columbians. So your ministry CIO will have more information on that very shortly. And we are really encouraging digital teams across government to start thinking about the kinds of priorities that you'd like to put forward over the next year. Those are all the big updates that I wanted to share. And now I'd like to open it up to a really fascinating conversation. So we have with us today Charmaine Lau, who is the Ministry CIO over at the Justice and Public Safety sector. So thank you for joining us, Charmaine.
Well, thank you. And I'm happy to be appearing on the Jamie Show. I'm a big fan.
That's great. So we have I'd like to start us going with a conversation around what is it that what are you up to? Tell us a little bit about your team and your priorities.
Okay. Well, maybe if you don't mind, I'll start with a bit of stage setting, because there may be some folks that aren't too familiar with what the Justice and Public Safety sector is. So it's a very large and diverse sector. It's almost like a third of the size of government. And it includes what most people would consider traditional justice and public safety sector services, like policing, courts, prosecution service, corrections. But it also includes a number of regulatory services on cannabis, licensing, gaming, as well as Emergency Management BC, Road Safety BC, Office of the Coroner, sort of more social-like services, like services for victims of crime. And then, of course, most recently, housing has joined our sector. So, as you can imagine, these branches have a wide variety of fascinating business challenges. I always say, if you really want to sink your teeth into some complex problems, come to the justice sector. We have a range of them and great teams of people. And that's the other thing that's very diverse in our sector. We have a range of digital experience and maturity, ranging from programs that are just moving away from fully manual processes to very experienced digital teams. And so in terms of how my branch supports that sector, there really is no one-size-fits-all approach for a sector like that. As I said, we have branches that have a lot of experience in digital transformation, their own digital teams that don't need as much support from ISB. And then on the other hand, we have programs that are just beginning their digital transformation journey. And they really do need ISB to come in and help them establish that digital team and coach them on best practices and support them in working agilely all throughout the project. One thing that I want to highlight that I think we've done very successfully in our sector, given how large and diverse it is that we've managed to bring all of those digital transformation initiatives together under a unifying digital strategy that is overseen by a cross-sector ADM governance committee. And that has really helped us prioritize and focus our investments in data and technology. And it's really also helped to guide my branch, because like every other place in government, we don't have enough resources to do everything. So it enables us to focus on those things that are things like common platforms and capabilities that will benefit the sector and potentially government as a whole. So we focus a lot of our effort on building out common platforms for case management and business intelligence, as well as common capabilities like digital identity, secure file transfer, content management. I could go on, but I think I'll just leave it for there. I think that gives you a taste of sort of what our sector involves and the work that my branch does to support it.
So obviously a lot going on. That's very exciting. I've been watching this space. I've seen that, when the budget came out, there were all sorts of exciting announcements around electronic delivery of justice services. I'm also a very keen listener of Minister Eby's podcast. So I know that your sector is very committed to all sorts of modernization activities. Could you give us a couple of examples of some of the recent wins that you've had?
Yeah, I mean, and that's a really great segue. What I'd like to start with is the work that we've done to virtualize court hearings. Again, just a bit of context setting. Prior to the pandemic, the vast majority of court hearings were in person and paper-based. Yes, we did have virtual appearances, and it had some promising uses, but essentially the use of video conferencing was seen as a digital support to an in-person hearing, not as a replacement to it. Well, of course, when the pandemic came, all of that shifted. We had to immediately pivot to providing virtual hearings and supporting those hearings with digital submission of documents. So one of the things that we did that was particularly innovative and helped us sort of rapidly move towards virtual hearings is we stood up a product working group, which was a cross-sector team that was led by ISB. And their objective was to explore, experiment with, and prove out solutions to the most pressing problems affecting our move towards virtual hearings. So this group supported the adoption of MS Teams across the sector, including the courts. They validated a number of features through successful proofs, which allowed us to more rapidly deploy those solutions that enabled virtual hearings. And so today, we have widespread adoption of MS Teams across tribunals, commissions, provincial court, and Supreme Court. And just to give you a few statistics, because I know you guys like those, close to 60% of provincial and Supreme Court appearances were enabled by technology between April and October of last year. This is compared to only about 15% in the same time period in previous years. So, that represents 120,000 technology-enabled appearances that were held during that period. And, I think one of the things that's been, I think is worth noting is that although this work was done to sort of rapidly respond to the pandemic, the benefit and the improved functionality we have will last beyond the pandemic. So even where hearings are held in a physical courtroom, we now have proven functionality to support that in-person hearing with digital submissions of documents, for remote appearances for people who live in remote communities and would have to travel long distances to attend a courtroom in person. And also remote appearances for our very busy law enforcement officers who may no longer need to travel and wait in the courtroom for their hearing. So, this is an area where I think that we were very successful in taking a very big challenge and turning around really quickly. Maybe, if you will, one other example, just to highlight on the public safety side, is our emergency management program. So this was a program that a little more than a year ago delivered services to individuals who had been evacuated from their homes in person by volunteers. And in many cases, it was done in an ad hoc sort of pop-up registration centers that were set up in communities that were impacted by emergencies. So the experience for evacuees was long lines, paper registration forms, paper vouchers that they could then take to a participating supplier for goods and services. And for the suppliers, they had to submit all of their invoices manually. They frequently had to have long delays in terms of getting reimbursed. And that affected our ability to attract suppliers to participate in this program. And, the situation for the emergency workers and volunteers wasn't that much better. I mean, while they were doing their best, they had no access to up-to-date information that would help them better support evacuees or in any way to proactively prepare for what services might be needed. Mm-hmm. So today, we have an emergency support services application that evacuees can register online for support services, and suppliers can electronically submit invoices. And the data from that application is now being used to support evacuation planning during emergencies and to deliver supports in a safe manner during the pandemic. So, we still have more work to do in this. We want to continue to digitize it, but those first few steps to set up those front-end systems have so improved the experience for citizens and the suppliers and the support workers.
Absolutely. But that story that you just told about EMBC, that sounds like something that would have benefits well beyond COVID, like application response to a wildfire or anything else. And that stat that you just shared around the percentage of virtual court hearings from 15 to 60%, like that's transformational.
Yeah.
So it sounds like COVID was actually maybe positive. Were there particular challenges? Did it upend any of your plans?
Would it be too strong of a statement to say that the impact was immediate and devastating? I mean, yeah. I mean, it certainly felt like that in the early days. I think you're right. I think like most programs in government, at least from what I've heard from my colleagues, we've sort of come out of the other, we're still going through it. We've emerged on more solid footing, but in the early days, I mean, my team was very much in reactive mode. Like we had, 20 to 50 emergencies every day. Fortunately, I have a great team, probably the best IMIT team in government, at least I believe so. And, they adapted well to the remote working conditions. I talked a lot about this project working group that was, deploying these new solutions rapidly to support virtual hearings. On the other side of that, when we try to deploy these modern tools, we discovered that these modern tools don't work so well on aging infrastructure and on Win 7 devices. So, I didn't maybe mention that our refresh was also put on hold as a result of COVID. So, we're trying to move forward with modern solution on aging infrastructure and tools. So that was a big challenge for us in the first 3 or 4 months. And, fortunately, we did receive some emergency funding to support our recovery, but the vast majority of that had to go towards network upgrades and shoring up the infrastructure. We deployed like more than 1,000 devices to like court clerks and and prosecutors so that they actually could, use MS Teams on their devices to participate in the hearing. So that was the early experience. But just to shift to sort of the more positive way that you started it, on a positive note, it also, the sector, the collaboration that the unification of the sector under this common purpose to sort of move us towards this goal of improving justice and virtualizing hearings was extremely positive. We had expanded in daily collaboration with the courts on this, and we certainly emerged from this on more stable foundation. And I really can't emphasize that collaboration enough. If there was a silver lining out of this process, it is that it really did unite our sector. And we have a sense of collaboration and shared purpose that I'm not saying we didn't have it before, but it's really strong now.
That's a really inspiring story. And I love how you both acknowledge some of the major gaps, the availability of devices, challenges that we saw from the OCIO, things like data sharing, digital dexterity even. So it's interesting to hear that resonates more broadly. We have a question that's come in from the audience that I think is really aligned with this conversation. And the question is, how are you planning on sustaining this momentum you've built to digitize some of your services and respond to citizens' needs immediately? So sort of in the aftermath of COVID, it sounds like this collaboration that you've just highlighted has been positive. Are there opportunities for you to sustain that?
Yes, exactly. So, and that's one of the things that we learned from this time is that the way that we were working was so effective. Why wouldn't we continue to work that way? So, I talked about this product working group that we stood up to sort of immediately find solutions to enable us to move to virtual courts. why wouldn't we continue that group and expand it to cover all justice and public safety sector projects? So that is something that we would continue to do. And as well, this we have revisited some of our governance processes and collaboration teams, and we are working in a much more collaborative way at both the senior leadership level, with police, with the judiciary. And I think that there is resounding agreement in all quarters that that is a model that we should capitalize on and continue with.
That's incredibly encouraging, and I think a good model for many of the digital groups across government. So very inspiring. I'd like to pivot a little bit now and talk about the future.
Okay.
And I'd love to hear a little bit about your emerging priorities. You've obviously had a lot to do in terms of holding down the fort through this time of crisis. But it sounds like there have also been opportunities to almost leapfrog. So what are your new priorities? What are the kinds of transformations that you're looking to drive in sort of medium to longer term?
Yeah. Well, as you say, short term, like I said, we still have a number of things underway that we need to complete. I would say sort of middle to long term. And some of these things aren't new priorities, they're just renewed priorities. So digital identity and authentication has sort of reemerged as a priority item for us to work on, because all of our projects that are underway, Traffic Court Online, the emergency management program I talked about, our digital evidence management system, all of them are dependent on us having a strong digital identity and authentication component. And, we are actively working with the OCIO and with Service BC to sort of look at those capabilities and look at opportunities to sort of expand and build upon them. Another one, again, not a new priority, but, it would be great to move some of our services into the cloud. So we're certainly looking for opportunities, again, to work with your office to look for opportunities for us to do that. Obviously, I understand there's some challenges there, so it needs to be done carefully, but that's certainly something that we would want to do. And, I sort of hinted at this before, we just can no longer afford to ignore our aging end-of-life legacy technology. We really do need to find a way to fund and support it going forward. And if there's one thing the pandemic highlighted for us, it's not like we didn't know we had aging infrastructure, we did, but it really highlighted how vulnerable our sector is with that aging technology. So we need to find a way to move forward with that. And finally, I think one other area that we'd like to work with our central government partners on, and indeed across government, is to expand the use of verifiable credentials. And, the idea that a digital process could produce a digital output, like a digital license or a certificate, that could then be a digital input to another program's digital process, is a really exciting idea that, that we think is worth exploring.
That's fantastic. One of the questions that's come in through Slido is around where service design fits into all of this. So the cloud priorities, the digital ID, that all sounds really exciting and important. What is the justice sector's approach to service design as part of digital change?
Well, it's fundamental to everything we do. So we do have a small but mighty service design team within our within ISB. They are small, so they can't work directly on all projects, but where they can't directly support a project, they do have, linkages to a set of sort of contractors that we can pull in. So definitely any project that we start with, we want to assess, what the services look like from the citizen? What is their journey, right, through that process? And, to my mind, I frequently say, we're required to do a privacy impact assessment by law. We're required to do a security threat and risk assessment by policy, but service design is optional. And it seems to me that it should be as fundamental as those other two things. And that's certainly how we treat it in our sector.
That's really encouraging. There were 15 people that wanted to ask you that question.
Okay.
So that's great. Hopefully that was a good answer for folks. Another question that has come out through the chat is around some of the comments you were making about EMBC and digital inclusion. So the question is, regarding support for EMBC, how are you addressing the portion of the population that doesn't have or has limited digital connectivity? And how do you deal with that when you're creating new solutions?
Okay, well, we have, what I didn't speak to because I focused on the technology and data parts, as I do, but there is a significant sort of culture change process that is part of EMBC, and a lot of collaboration with local governments that provide the services, First Nation communities. And so the team works directly with those sort of small communities to actually support them and to ensure that they have the technology that they need to sort of train and know how to work these systems. So if an individual that needs to register doesn't have a device or access to that, there are community people that sort of have portable devices that could help them register. So, it doesn't necessarily address that physical distancing thing right now, but it would be a future piece while we continue to wait for, more network connectivity to some of these remote areas.
Fantastic. It's great to hear that you're thinking of everybody. I think that's something that we see in the digital principles, how critical it is for us to design for the whole community.
Project that had a significant amount of service design in it.
Fantastic. Okay, so last question, your advice. Do you have any tips or advice for digital teams across government? And from the chat, somebody is asking, if you had to do it all over again, is there anything you would have done differently?
Okay, let me address the advice for the digital teams. So, first of all, there isn't really any advice that I could give them that would, my first advice would be look to your group, follow the digital principles. There's lots of good material there. If I were to pick up on some things that I've learned through our experience, I would say that digital teams have to continue to tell their story, share their successes and their lessons learned, because we really even though we have had a lot of successes, we need to continue to grow our capacity. And in particular, I think we need to move away from procuring full vendor digital teams to creating internal or hybrid digital teams where the vendor resources augment and complement our internal teams. That's one thing that I learned. Like you need to have your own team here to sort of continue, not only is it empowering and to your staff and helps develop that, the talents of our employees, but it also supports that ongoing product development. And it should help slow or prevent the accumulation of technical debt in the future. So, I'm a big fan of that, moving away from projects to more product teams. And then I also think one of the lessons that we learned is we also need to continue to educate and support the business on agile development and best practices, because they need to understand their role for timely decision-making, the crucial role of a product owner. And one of the things that we've seen is we've seen digital teams start off really strong, and then one or two members leave or change, and there's no bench strength within the business to replace them with with an experienced individual. And so capacity, I guess, is also an issue with the business as well. So I don't mean to be too much of a downer, because we've made great success, but we have to continue and really build that capacity so that we have more depth.
Wonderful. That's a great answer. Thank you so much for joining us today, Charmaine. And a huge congratulations to you and your team on some pretty phenomenal leadership and really wonderful supports for the people of British Columbia.
It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. We will be following up with a survey. We'd love to hear from you, so let us know what you think. Priority topics for future sessions. Our next session will be on June 1st. We're going to be diving into the topic of accessibility and how it can be helpful for delivering inclusive digital services. And since it's May the 4th, I will wish you all the force for your digital teams, and I wish you a wonderful day. Take care.